Good evening. My name is Evan Weiner. That guy in that picture next to me, you might recognize Lawrence Peter Berra. And I had the privilege of being guest speaker at Yogi Berra's museum on the campus of Montclair State University over in New Jersey. And he used to tell me, good job, kid, good job, whenever I spoke to him. Now, Yogi was a big part of the baseball culture, huge part of the baseball culture back in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and into the 21st century. And behind him are baseball cards, also a big part of the American culture. Baseball and the American culture go back a very, very, very long time. Back, even to 1865, when Andrew Johnson, the president of the United States after Lincoln was assassinated, decided the best way to get the country to heal, the North and South, was through baseball. And he invited members of the Brooklyn Atlantics and the Washington Nationals to the White House for lunch, promoting baseball and promoting national unity. In 1954, the French philosopher Jacques Barzun noted, "Whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And if you were going to do it, don't go to a major league game. No, go to a high school game. Go to a sandlot game. Go to an industrial league game. That is where you learn a lot about baseball, because baseball was so embedded in the culture in 1954. And that's Casey at the Bat. Casey at the Bat is the first literary figure in baseball. Mighty Casey struck out. There's no joy in Mudville today. The mighty Casey has struck out. And that slide is from the 1946 Disney cartoon, Casey at the Bat. Jerry Colonna, who was Bob Hope's second banana back in the day, he was the voice of Casey at the Bat. Now, I have something in common with the guy who wrote Casey at the Bat. His name was Ernest Thayer, and he was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and also 1888. And he wrote Casey at the Bat. He was the guy who wrote it, and but he didn't take credit for it. It was printed without an author's credit on June 3rd, 1888. Now, I was, I don't know, I was 7, 8 years old. I was at PS 151 in Woodside, Queens. And I had a teacher, Miss Alexander, and Miss Alexander was the prototypical 1920s teacher who never got married. She had the blue hair, remember the blue hair? And she always wore a white blouse, and she had the blue skirt and had the tissue up there. And I'm in 4th grade, and she's given the class an assignment. You have to read Casey at the Bat and analyze Casey at the Bat. Talk about what it is. And you know, I gave it a thought for about 2 seconds, because I was a Mets fan in 1964, not the Yankees, although I like Yogi, but I was a Yankee fan in 1964, Mets as a kid, and I was living in Queens. And I just thought that Casey was a rotten baseball player. He was a lousy player. He struck out with the game on the line. No joy in Mudville that day for the mighty Casey had struck out. Well, Miss Alexander said, no, it's all about man's failure. And I thought about it watching Ron Swoboda strike out 5 times in the first game of a doubleheader when I went to in 1969. That was failure. And I even told Ron Swoboda about that one day. Casey Thayer didn't even think much of the poem. He reads the poem in 1895 at a Harvard class reunion, and he never took credit for it until 1895. But other people liked it. One important person liked it a lot. His name, DeWolf Hopper, father of Heather Hopper, who was an actress and a gossip columnist into the 1950s and 1960s. And he read this poem and figured something out. I could play Casey at the Bat. And DeWolf Hopper played Casey at the Bat for the first time on August 14th, 1888. Also, school kids had to read it, like me, and analyze it in some school districts. Until probably the 1970s. I asked some teachers that have come to this talk, do you still have Casey at the Bat part of the curriculum? No, except one teacher in New Jersey. She has a talent show, and every year they do Casey at the Bat. Anyway, Hopper decided on to do this, and on August 14th, 1888, he performs it for the first time on stage. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem and acted out the poem more than 10,000 times, whether it was on the vaudeville stage, whether it was in film, which he did in film in the 1920s, a silent film anyway, and along with records. And he popularized this so much so that somebody else decided they too were going to put it on, or put it on a cylinder. That is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And there was an eccentric who lived in town, lived by himself, a hermit sort of, and he collected all kinds of things. Among the things that he collected was this. This is a cylinder, and you used to put sound on the cylinder. And on that cylinder, if you put it into something like that, and this still works because I was at the Springfield Library in New Jersey, and Deborah, who is the library director, Deborah Spindell, played it for me and plays perfectly. And in the 1890s, if you had one of those, you could listen to this guy, Russell Hunting, who put Casey at the Bat on the cylinder. Now, Hunting was an actor, but he also was a sound recordist, and he does it for the first time in 1893, puts it on that big cylinder. And then again in 1898, so you have not only the poem printed there that you could see in a newspaper or a book, but you could actually hear it in your home if you had one of those cylinder players. So he does it in 1893, and he does it in 1898. Both times he used a heavy Irish brogue. John Kaiser in 1905 recorded it for Thomas Edison over in Menlo Park in New Jersey. Hopper would finally record it for Victor. Remember Victor, RCA Victor, with Nipper the dog, his master's voice? Well, Hopper recorded it for Victor. That doesn't come out until 1906. But you have a chance in 1906 or 1907 to actually listen to it on this old Victrola. This is in Quebec, Sagway, Quebec. Some guy just has an open garage that you walk in, and he has all this old stuff. This actually works. This is a hand crank Victrola, and back in 1905, 1906, you could hear the versions, Kaiser's version or Hopper's version, by cranking that thing up on the old Victrola. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film. That would be in 1922, an early short subject by Lee DeForest. Wallace Beery does it in 1927, also a silent movie. Both Hopper and Beery are in silent movies. Kelowna, the comic, recorded it for the Disney cartoon in 1946. Jackie Gleason performed it on one of his television shows in the 1950s. Johnny Bench, Tug McGraw, and others voiced the poem, often in orchestral settings, and the others included George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin, doing it in Tampa to raise money for the Tampa PBA. And George and Billy, I don't know which inclination or which incarnation that was, whether it was Billy 1, Billy 2, Billy 3, Billy 4, as manager of the Yankees, but Billy and George did Casey at the Bat. Now there's a sign, ball game today at the Polo Grounds. And if any of you recognize that sign, just put it in chat there, because this sign actually is rather important to something. And if you don't know, if you're not putting in chat, I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. Because a songwriter hopped on the subway back in 1907, 1908, and he was looking up at the placards. You know, Dr. Zinmore, who's curing zits and all, used to have like 40 of those. and you'd see the others for the guy from DeVry and all that. But one day, this songwriter, Jack Norworth, looks up and sees Ball Game Today at the Polo Grounds, 1907, 1908. And he's looking at the sign, and he's looking at the sign, and he comes up with an idea. I'm going to do a baseball song. So there's Harry Carey, the late Harry Carey, who popularized this song in between the top of the 7th inning and the bottom of the 7th inning. He didn't popularize it. He re-energized it, I should say, as the Chicago Cubs announcer in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. The song, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. The song written in 1908. Song written by Jack Norworth and Albert Von Tilzer, neither one of whom saw a baseball game in 1908 or 1909, or in Norworth's case until 1928, and Van Tilzer's case until 1940. The story is pretty simple. You only know part of it. You know, take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back to something. Root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame. Or it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Norworth wrote the music. Von Tilzer wrote the words. And there could be a case made, and there was a woman in the Washington Post last year, 2019, did an op-ed piece making the case that the first women's liberation song ever was Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And here's why. Back in the day, 1908, it was considered rather unladylike to show up at a baseball game. Women just didn't show up at baseball games. Baseball players were ruffians. They were tough guys living on the road all the time. And baseball, a baseball stadium, a baseball park was not a place for women. Well, Norworth comes up with this story. The story is about a woman by the name of Katie Casey. We're not sure if she is from Brooklyn or if she's from the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But she is from New York, and she hops on the subway. We know that. And she has a beau, or maybe a friend, or maybe it's her husband. And baseball games used to start at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in those days. And she and her beau, and we assume it's her beau, not her husband, it's a boyfriend, not a brother, are on the subway, and they're going back and forth. Well, what are we going to do today? I want to go to the baseball game, says Katie Casey. And the boyfriend isn't too convinced that that's a good idea. And they're going back and forth, and they're talking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Finally, Katie can't take it anymore. And she looks at the boyfriend and says, take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back, for we will root for the home team. They don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. We don't know if Katie Casey ever went to the baseball game. We don't know that. We don't know what happened to the boyfriend. In fact, we don't really know what happened after she started screaming, take me out to the ball game. But we do know this about Katie. She had the baseball fever, she had the baseball bug, and she had it bad, which is part of the first stanza. In the third stanza, there's wording that suggests that Katie knows all the players, knows how to get them going. Now, back in those days, no numbers on the back of the uniform, no names on the back of the uniform, but somehow she knew every player. She knew every player. They leave it open as to why she knew every player. They leave it open as to whether or not she even went to the baseball game that day. But Katie Casey was a baseball fan. That song, which was written in 1908, was popularized on the vaudeville stage. Just like Hopper popularized Casey at the Bat, it becomes ingrained as part of the American culture. As I said, Norworth and Von Tilzer never saw a baseball game when they wrote the song. It would be 20 years later that Norworth actually attended the game, and 32 years later that Von Tilzer went to a baseball game. But the song would become famous on stage, written and released in 1908. And it's the only song from 1908 that I can safely say in the United States is played under normal circumstances when there's no COVID-19, played every day from late February almost until November, because it's played at every baseball game, whether it's a major league game or a minor league game. But funny enough, or strangely enough, Major League Baseball never embraced the song. It would not be until 1934 before the song was played at a baseball park, Major League Baseball park, and that was during the 1934 World Series between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Detroit Tigers. The song is played on a daily basis, and of course now it's played again because baseball is back, even though the Mets, they're not playing tonight, the Miami Marlins, because two members of the Mets organization, a player and maybe a coach, have tested positive for COVID-19. Nora Bayes was Norwood's wife, and she popularized the song on the vaudeville stage, and her big hit besides that was Shine On Harvest Moon. Shine On Harvest Moon is not played to the extent these days that Major League Baseball or Take Me Out to the Ball Game is played in Major League parks. I don't think it's played much on radio. I'm not sure about Spotify and iTunes and all that, but 1934, baseball started playing it, and it has never gone out of style, and it's probably still the only song from 112 years ago that's played on a regular basis in regular rotation. It was played in the movies. There's Groucho. That's Night at the Opera, and not to give the Night at the Opera plot away, it was done in 1936, so you're talking 84 years ago. Groucho and Margaret Dumont go to Italy. Margaret Dumont is the head of the opera, or the major patron of the opera. She wants a certain tenor. Groucho, along the way, meets Harpo and Chico, and they have a friend who's a tenor, and they get him back to the United States, the famous stateroom scene and all that. And they knock out the tenor that Margaret Dumont wants, but they need time to do it, and they need time to get the other tenor, who's played by Alan Jones, Jack Jones' father, on the stage. So Chico and Harpo have sheet music. They hand it out to everyone in the orchestra pit. It's Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Groucho drops down from the box, and he has his basket, and he's selling peanuts and Cracker Jacks. Harpo Marx would return to the song in 1955 on I Love Lucy. It has been done in numerous movies, numerous TV shows. Take Me Out to the Ball Game endures 112 years later. Now, some of you might know that this game, baseball, came out of England. It was called Rounders, and it was played by English kids in England. And that Rounders came over to the United States, and some form of Rounders was played in the 1790s up in the Brochures. There's a little museum in the Brochures. It's the Brochures Baseball Museum. It's in North Adams, Massachusetts. It's basically about two players, Jack Chesborough and Jeff Reardon, who played Major League Baseball in the 80s, and Chesborough won 41 games for the 1904 New York Yankees. But in that museum, they have some evidence that baseball was played in Pittsfield in about 1792. Baseball comes out of the game Rounders. Abbott and Costello there. Who's on first? Abbott and Costello are doing a routine that is called the 20th century in the United States, was something that came out of Rounders as well. Rounders was pretty simple. You had the straight guy, or the wise guy, Bud Abbott here, and you had the stooge, or the idiot, Lou Costello. And Rounders was pretty simple. The idiot would ask questions of the straight guy, and the straight guy would have all kind of answers that didn't make any sense. And this would go round and round and round and round and round and round, which is why it's called Rounders. Now, Who's on First was not an Abbott and Costello original. In comedy, people, let's say, borrow all the time. A guy by the name of Mike Musto claimed he came up with the Who's on First routine. He's out of St. Louis, and it's the St. Louis Wolves, as you can see on Bud Abbott's shirt. And there is some question as to whether or not Musto actually came up with the act. Other people claim that he did the routine or came up with the routine. There is also this question of whether or not Abbott and Costello paid $15 for the routine or if they borrowed it. John Joseph, who's a comedian who lives not too far from you over at Shelter Rock, claims that he had heard Alan King was his mentor, the comic Alan King, but he had heard through the grapevine that somewhere along the line that Abbott Costello actually threw $15 at Musto. Max Docelli, who's a comedian out of Connecticut, who was on cruise ships forever. He was actually the king comic of cruise ships for a very, very long time, about 30 years, said, hey, they're comics. Of course they stole everything. Comics steal everything. So we don't know about that, but we do know that these guys got the routine roughly in 1936. It was part of a very common style on the vaudeville stage and the burlesque stage, both of them. B-U-R-E-L-E, B-U-R-E-L-S-Q-U-E, burlesque, Q-U-E at the end. That means it was a family show. B-U-R-L-E-S-K is where the women took their clothes off. Rounder is a common style. Abbott and Costello met on the burlesque circuit. It has been suggested that Bud Abbott did sort of a form of Who's on First with baseball. Abbott and Costello get a hold of this after they meet and team up, and that was around 1936, 1937. So they have it for a couple of years. They're perfecting it, they're perfecting it, they're perfecting it. And they may have gotten some help from John Grant, who is Costello's comedy writer and lasted until the 1950s, until Lou threw him out because he thought John Grant was a communist. And then Lou realized his material wasn't up to scratch, and he brought him back. And another guy by the name of Will Glickman. And Abbott and Costello were gaining some fame at this point, and they were on the Kate Smith radio show, which was on Sunday nights on the CBS network. And in March of 1938, Abbott and Costello finally get this routine all ready to go, and they unleash it on the Kate Smith show, the radio show, which was one of the most popular shows on radio in 1938, and the rest is history. People fell in love with it immediately. They laughed and laughed and laughed and laughed. Abbott and Costello performed at the White House for Franklin Roosevelt, for Harry Truman, and for Dwight Eisenhower. They did it in the movies. They did it on radio. They did it on TV. Remember the Abbott and Costello show, which I saw as a kid in reruns in the 1960s with Sidney Fields, and Joe Besser was on that as well as Stinky. Abbott and Costello were enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame around 1956, right before they broke up. Now, Vin Scully was the Los Angeles Dodgers announcer. He actually started out as the Brooklyn Dodgers announcer in 1950. Moved out west when the club moved in September of 1957. And there are still people who come to this talk who have never forgiven Walter O'Malley. They were in Brooklyn at the time. I've done this talk in Florida. I've done this talk on cruise ships. People don't live in Brooklyn anymore, but they still don't forgive O'Malley for taking the Dodgers out of Brooklyn and moving him to Los Angeles. But anyway, Scully, about 12, 13 years ago, is looking at his TV monitor. He's doing the game on radio and TV the way he did the first 2 innings on radio and TV. And he is looking at his monitor, and he sees this sight. It's a guy by the name of Who. He was a player from South Korea. And Vin Scully looks at this and says, now we know the answer to the eternal question of who's on first. There he is. Who? Who's on first? There's a player in the South Korean League now by the name of Who obviously, as a hitter, has been on first base. There was also a guy named Watt. Remember, who's on first, Watt's on second. he played with the Washington Nationals/Senators in the 1920s before this routine hit it big. So we know who is on first and what's on second, but I can guarantee you, there's never been a third baseman who has had the name, I don't give a darn, third base. A few years ago, 3 years ago, I went up to Hyde Park because I had to talk to Franklin Roosevelt. I had some questions for Roosevelt. I do a talk on the 1936 Olympics because I worked with Marty Glickman, knew Sam Stoller. They never got to race in the 1936 Berlin Olympics in the 4x4 relay. Avery Brundage replaced them with Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf. But I do that talk, and I do a talk as well on the early days of TV. Roosevelt was the first guy on TV in the United States, and also this talk. So I had some things to ask Roosevelt and Eleanor, and they were gracious guests, hosts rather. We were very happy with the fact that they were hosting us. Now they offered us the books, but the books were a little stiff, as were they. But I finally got down to what I needed to talk to with Franklin Roosevelt. Why didn't the United States boycott the 1936 Nazi games, which gave legitimacy to Hitler and the Hitler regime in Germany in 1936? How was it that he was on TV for the first time? And I want to know about the green light letter. The green light letter allowed baseball to play baseball on the major league level after the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And it was the baseball commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, who wrote a letter to Roosevelt. And the letter basically said, what do we do? In 1918, we cut the season short because of World War I. The American League did not want to play in September. The National League wanted to. In fact, the American League didn't even want to play the World Series. The compromise was reached. The Cubs played the Red Sox in the World Series, and the Red Sox won in 1918. But they cut the season short. It had nothing to do with the flu pandemic of 1918. So Landis wants to know, what do we do? And Roosevelt answers, I honestly feel, and this is how important baseball was in the culture, in the 1930s and 1940s. You had the Negro Leagues in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And they played in Major League Baseball parks, like in Washington and at Yankee Stadium, and you had Major League Baseball. Roosevelt says, or writes in his letter to Landis, and it's called the Green Light Letter, 1942. I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2 hours or 2.5 hours. Roosevelt's been dead since 1945, so he hasn't seen Red Sox-Yankees games in the 2010s, which go 4 hours. Anyway, 2.5 hours, and which could be gotten at very little cost. Now, Roosevelt could afford the box seats and club seats and luxury boxes at Yankee Stadium, even at the pricey cost. And incidentally, I hope that night games could be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to watch a game occasionally, which would take their minds off of what's going on during the war. That was the Green Light Letter. And not only did it green light baseball, but Dan Rooney. My background is as a journalist, radio and TV, newspapers and magazines. I did write op-ed pieces for Newsday between 2001 and 2005. Back then, I spoke to Dan Rooney, who is the president, the late Dan Rooney, who is the president of the Pittsburgh Steelers in the National Football League. And we talked about the Green Light Letter one day. And he said, when that letter was sent to baseball, we, the National Football League, decided it applied to us. It also applied to the National Hockey League, to whether basketball was being played, which was the National Basketball League, which was an industrial league, and whatever sports were going on, tennis and golf. But Roosevelt said, play, takes the mind off the war. And there's Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was in 10 movies, baseball in the movies, and baseball was an integral part of the movies, even through this day where baseball isn't as popular. Babe Ruth was in 10 movies. They included Heading Home, 1920 silent film, that you just saw the Babe there. Starred Babe as what else? A baseball star. Babe starred in Babe Comes Home, 1927 movie, and the prints disintegrated. The way the prints were made back then, if you didn't take care of them, they disintegrated. He also appeared as himself in a movie that was preserved, Harold Lloyd's silent movie called Speedy, 1928. And that's the movie where Harold Lloyd hangs from the clock in that famous scene, hanging from the clock. Ruth was in 10 movies. The last movie he was in, Pride of the Yankees. But the first major star from baseball who made it onto Broadway and into the films was a New York Giants second baseman by the name of Mike Donlin, the baseball idol of Manhattan. And he was a pretty good player in the dead ball era, back in the 00s and the teens of the 19th or the 20th century. A career 333 hitter, but he left the game an awful lot because he could make more money on the stage and in vaudeville. He retired in 1914, went right into the movies. His first movie, right off the bat. Hey, got to typecast him, right? It featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw, who himself was in a number of movies back in the 19-teens and into the 20s. Donlin, it is estimated, made at least 53 appearances on film. Most of that disintegrated or was lost over time. Lou Gehrig was in the movies. 1938, he's in a movie called Rawhide, which has no resemblance to the television show called Rawhide, and it's a forgettable movie. It's an awful movie. It's forgettable. The plot is simple. Lou Gehrig, who grew up in New York, went to Columbia University, lived in New Rochelle, New York, played with the New York Yankees. Lou Gehrig decides he's had enough of New York. He's had enough of the limelight. He's had enough pressurized or being pressured by playing first base for the New York Yankees every day. That's it. He's had enough. He's at Grand Central Terminal in the movie and announces to the assembled media that that's it. I've had enough. I'm out of here. Me and my sister, me and my sister bought some land in Montana. I am going to retire and I am going to relax in solitude. And then he leaves Grand Central Terminal and he heads out to Montana. Movie is, there's nothing to this movie, but there is something to this movie. Lou Gehrig, of course, came down with ALS, the disease named after him. And he is diagnosed in 1939 with it. And the doctors who were caring for him, both in New York and the Mayo Clinic, took a look at this movie to see how he was walking when he filmed the movie. And they were able to at least find out how quickly the progression was, where Lou Gehrig was the Iron Horse, never missed a baseball game, to where he ultimately is in a wheelchair. So they used that for medical research purposes. Another Yankee who lent his body literally to the medical profession was Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was one of the first people who ever had chemotherapy in 1948. Helped him a little bit, and then he slid back. But Babe Ruth agreed to chemotherapy. So, you know, Ruth and Gehrig are remembered as great baseball players, but they also had medical issues, major medical issues, that doctors studied. And maybe that's more important than 494 home runs in Lou Gehrig's case and 714 home runs in Babe Ruth's career. So Gehrig is in this movie called Rawhide. Hey, Bugs Bunny was in a cartoon. He took on the Gas House Gorillas. I love Bugs Bunny. Everything I learned in life came from a Warner Brothers cartoon. And Bugs is playing a heckler. Hey, Bugs is the greatest cartoon character as far as comedy goes. He would have been a great stand-up comic in the Borscht Belt back in the day in the Catskills. And he's heckling these guys, and he's heckling these guys. They're playing the teetotalers, and they're slaughtering the teetotalers. And Bugs yells, "I can murder you guys with one arm behind my back." And the Gas House Gorillas take the challenge. Bugs has his carrot juice down there, and his carrot, and his peanuts in the bag. I don't see any Cracker Jacks there. And Bugs takes him on 1 against 9 and eventually would win. Bugs Bunny did beat the Gas House Gorillas. Some of the movies you might remember, Rosie O'Donnell. hugging Madonna there, Gina Davis with the chest protector on. League of Their Own. And Casey Candell, who played second base with the Montreal Expos back in the 1990s. I talked to him one day about League of Their Own. He was the technical advisor. I said, how were you the technical advisor? He said, it was simple. My mother played there, and she told me all about this league, which started about 1942-43, underwritten by Phil Wrigley of Juicy Fruit Chewing Gum and Wrigley Spearmint and Doublemint and all that. He underwrote the league initially. Jimmy Fox, the former Major League Slugger, was the manager. Tom Hanks played the character based on Jimmy Fox in this movie. There's no crying in baseball, but Casey said that they tried to be as true to the spirit of the league as they could in this movie, and he had a lot of notes from his mother, and they basically translated it into the movie, League of Their Own. Lou Gehrig's story, Pride of the Yankees, starring Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper was right-handed, never played any baseball, so he had to train to play baseball. And all the shots that were done with Gary Cooper in a mirror because he was right-handed and Gehrig, of course, was left-handed. Bull Durham, there's Kevin Costner and Tim Robbins. Costner playing an old catcher, 32 years old, Crash Davis, career minor leaguer. Robbins playing a superior prospect who has a 10-cent head and $1 million arm. It's Crash Davis's job to make sure that he has Nuke LaLoosh's head on straight. The character is based on a guy by the name of Steve Dalkowski, who played in the Baltimore Orioles organization. The movie was written by Ron Shelton, and Shelton and Dalkowski were teammates. Shelton remembered that Dalkowski could throw a baseball at over 100 miles an hour. He was erratic. He struck out a lot of guys, walked a lot of guys, had 1 cup of coffee in the major leagues during spring training about 1962-63, had all kind of off-field problems, but he was the guy that the Tim Robbins character was modeled after. And of course, you had Susan Sarandon in there as the baseball Annie, who, quote unquote, broke in all of the rookies or the up-and-coming players. And then she and Kevin Costner also hooked up in that movie. That movie also had a guy by the name of Max Petkin in the movie. Spoke to him after the movie came out. He played with the Cleveland Indians, but he was baseball's clown prince. And he would go from minor league team to minor league team to the same routine that you would see the Borscht Belt, including the Sid Caesar routine of fountains where he'd spit the water out and all of that stuff. And he was part of the American culture too, Max Petkin. There's Jerry Lewis talking to Pee Wee Reese, 1958-59. Don Zimmer is back there, and he is doing a movie called The Geisha Boy. And he's using the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Los Angeles Coliseum as props in his movie. And baseball, when the Dodgers move out to Los Angeles, baseball has a love affair with TV shows and movies. The Geisha Boy. Robert Redford is in The Natural. That was done in Buffalo, New York, The Natural. Costner again. Field of Dreams out in the Iowa cornfield where the Yankees and White Sox were supposed to play this year, but that was postponed because of COVID-19. Costner talking to Joe Jackson, shoeless Joe Jackson, who appears out of nowhere in this field. Jackson, of course, was thrown out of baseball in 1920 because he allegedly, with 7 others, threw the 1919 World Series for $5,000. The Cincinnati Reds beat the Chicago White Sox. There is Billy Bean, played by Brad Pitt. Billy Bean, who is the world's smartest man. All you have to do is ask him. This is based on the book Moneyball by Michael Lewis, which is probably in the library, and the film came out. It's probably the last big film on baseball. Moneyball, Michael Lewis. It's all about Billy Bean and Billy Bean using analytics with players and selecting players with the Oakland A's because they don't have a big budget for players. So he went out shopping for cheap players who we thought would fit in. And Walter Matthau, who never does anything bad. Walter Matthau in The Bad News Bears. Walter Matthau played Oscar Madison 3 times in 3 different genres. One, The Fortune Cookie with Jack Lemmon, the movie, The Odd Couple, of course, and Grumpy Old Men. Here is the 1970s Bad News Bears, sponsored by Chico Bell Bonds. And this movie is 30 years old already. Major League, well, actually, Major League 2 isn't 30 years old. With Charlie Sheen, but Major League 1 is 30 years old. The Cleveland Indians looking to win the World Series, and that is Charlie Sheen in the middle there with that movie. America's Favorite Team is back. That was a few years later. So some of the movies: Pride of the Yankees, Bull Durham, Major League, Angels in the Outfield. And that was done in Pittsburgh, Forbes Field, because Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he suggested, hey, you want to have a nice spot to shoot a film? Come out to Forbes Field, which is in Schenley Park, and it's now part of the University of Pittsburgh. The wall is still out there. I went there 2 years ago. The wall is still out there from Forbes Field. But it was a pretty ballpark in Schenley Park, and so Bing Crosby said, why don't you do that there? Bob Hope was part owner of the Cleveland Indians. This is the 40s and 50s. In 1977, Danny Kaminsky, Danny Kaye, whose father was my mother-in-law's dentist in the Bronx in the 1920s and 1930s. And Danny Kaye would pop in every once in a while and surprise the patients back in the 30s. And he wasn't big yet, with performances there, as she told me. Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy. Oh, Danny Kaye was part owner of the Seattle Mariners in 1937. Field of Dreams, The Geisha Boy, Bad News Bears, The Natural, and Moneyball. Some of the movies. There was a Tom Selleck movie about baseball in Japan as well about 10 years ago. Is Homer Simpson in baseball's Hall of Fame? We'll have to wait to hear the answer. The Simpsons, 1992 champions. The Springfield Nuclear Power Plant beat former Major League Baseball players. Homer, of course, scores the winning run. Smithers with the trophy, and there is Monty Burns. Monty Burns, who was the owner of the nuclear power plant, and he's there. Hey, looks like Sandy Koufax is about ready to give an autograph to Mr. Ed, or Wilbur Post, Mr. Ed. Sandy Koufax was on the Mr. Ed, when Mr. Ed, the talking horse. Nobody could talk to a horse, of course, unless you're talking to the famous Mr. Ed. And Wilbur, played by Alan Young. This is roughly 1962-63. Herman Munster tried out for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Apparently, the producers of the Munsters, who are the same people who brought you Leave It to Beaver, didn't pay Walter O'Malley for the Dodgers logo on the shirt or the hat. And there's Leo DeRocher, and this is strictly TV. Leo was the third base coach of the Los Angeles Dodgers when this was shot, 64-65. And the story is pretty simple. You know, the Munsters were an all-American family living at 1313 Mockingbird Lane. And Herman would take his son, Edward Wolfgang Munster, out to the local field and play baseball with him. Well, one day, Leo DeRocher comes out of the bushes and has a contract in hand and is ready to sign Herman Munster because he can hit home runs. And Herman Munster does try out for the Dodgers. It doesn't work out well because Herman is 7'6" and weighs 540 pounds. And when he slides into second base, he sends the shortstop into left field. He's hurting people, and he's kind of a clunker in the field. He's released. It's a couple months later, and Herman's out playing football with his son, Eddie, and he's punting the ball. And out of the bushes comes Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, the Los Angeles Rams general manager of the National Football League. And he's got a contract. Now, Leo couldn't sign anybody. He was a third base coach. In fact, Leo never woke up that early in the morning unless there was a baseball game. He was out all night. He was married to Lorraine Day at one point, the actress. Anyway, and Leo comes out running out of the bushes. Don't, Elroy, don't, you'll be sorry. And that's the end of the show, The Munsters. Hey, that is Gilligan. And those two headhunters there who want to shrink Gilligan's head, the guy on the left is Jim Lefevre, who played with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The guy on the right is Al Ferrara. And Al Ferrara from Brooklyn, New York, once said that he knew he made it as a baseball player because his picture was on the baseball card. Now, I always wondered about Gilligan's Island. So many people visited the island. How'd they get there? How'd they get home? And how come they never told anybody there were 7 stranded castaways? Gilligan, the skipper, Mr. and Mrs. Howe, the professor, Marianne and Ginger. They never got rescued. Never got rescued, and that thing lasted until the 1980s. Johnny Rosenberg, the catcher of the Los Angeles Dodgers. He's on Dragnet. That's a very Dragnet-looking picture, isn't it, with Jack Webb? Walter O'Malley, the Dodgers owner, appeared with the Rifleman star from the 1950s. And one time, Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in a show called Branded in 1965. Another Dodgers player, Wes Parker, the first baseman, also had a brief acting career. Willie Davis, the center fielder, acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's movie Which Way to the Front, and in The Flying Nun. Roseboro appeared in Dragnet. That would be 1968, not 66. That wasn't on yet. Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater. He was also on Mr. Ed and Experiment in Terror. The Dodger players, if they wanted to, got a lot of work. And the guy on the left there is Phil Silvers. Phil Silvers of The Bilko Show, Phil Silvers of The Phil Silvers Show, Phil Silvers of You'll Never Get Rich Show. All the same show, depended where you were in syndication when you watched it. Now, the guy on the right, you probably don't recognize. The guy on the right was a guy by the name of Steve Bilko. Nat Hiken was the brains behind The Bilko Show, also Car 54, Where Are You? And there is one episode of Car 54, Where Are You? Where there's a pickpocket at Yankee Stadium for Game 1 of the World Series, and Tilly and Muldoon are the guys who are supposed to pick them up. Hiken was obviously a baseball fan. And back in the day, in the 1950s, there was the National League and the American League, Major Leagues, and there was also the Pacific Coast League, which never claimed Major League status, but probably should have. They were in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle and San Diego up and down the coast. Bilko played for the Los Angeles Angels and was a prolific home run hitter. Got up to the major leagues, he wasn't that good. He was one of those players too good for minor league baseball, but not good enough for Major League Baseball, although he hung on for a few years in Major League Baseball, playing with the American League Los Angeles Angels in 1961. Hiken fell in love with the name Bilko, and that's how he got his name. There was also one other guy who got his name immortalized or in baseball, in TV history. Moose Steuben. Moose Steuben, 1932, was born in Brooklyn, rather the Bronx. He ended up as a California Angels coach. And Aaron Spelling, when he was looking for a name for the captain of the Love Boat, said Steuben. That was it, Steuben. Moose Steuben. Gave him McCloud's character, Captain Steuben, was named after Moose Steuben, formerly of the Bronx, and then he moved to El Paso, Texas, way back when. And Moose Steuben was around. So Donna Reed, The Brady Bunch, Mr. Ed, The Munsters, Phil Silvers Show, also known as Bilko, just some of the shows that featured Major League Baseball players. And then Bob Uecker was, he was a catcher with the Milwaukee Braves, Atlanta Braves, St. Louis Cardinals, Philadelphia Phillies. He worked after his career with the Atlanta Braves in community relations, but he was also a part-time stand-up comic. And he's playing in New Orleans, and Al Hurt happened to see him, and Al Hurt was good friends with Johnny Carson. Hurt, who was the regular trumpet player at Chris Owens' bar in New Orleans on Bourbon Street. Chris danced for Batista doing the can-can. She still has a place where occasionally she performs. She's in her 90s. When Cher grows up, she wants to be Chris Owens. Anyway, Euchre is doing his stand-up comedy routine. And Al Hurt gets on the phone, calls Johnny Carson. You got to have this guy on your show immediately. And he does. And Euchre kills him, as the comics would say. He slays him. And Johnny calls him to the seat. If you were called to the seat, your career was made. And in the break, Johnny asks him, was it true that you were really a baseball player? And he said, yeah, I got a baseball card and all. Funny thing about it, Bob Euchre hit Sandy Koufax better than anybody else did. And he got an intentional walk. Koufax intentionally walked him to get to the next hitter. Johnny Carson, nicknamed Bob Euchre, Mr. Baseball. And Mr. Baseball would go on to Bob Euchre to the Miller beer commercials and would be the father on the Mr. Belvedere series on ABC. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. That is the play, Damn Yankees, open on Broadway, all about the Yankees winning too much and Washington never winning. Although Washington won the World Series in 1933. One of the Washington players is Joe Hardy. And Joe Hardy sells his soul to the devil so the Senators can win. The big hits in that show, whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. In Damn Yankees. And the other big song, You Gotta Have Heart. Ed Sullivan, 1969. Ed Sullivan. Ed Sullivan greets the amazing Mets, the 1969 Mets. They won the World Series. And good old Ed is on stage introducing the amazing Mets. That is Art Shamsky, bottom left, front row. Next to him, Ron Rocky Swoboda, who I enjoyed hanging out with. Ron Taylor, who was the pitcher who ended up being the Toronto Blue Jays team physician. Seaver is in the second row to the right. Tug McGraw is 4 from Seaver. Tug McGraw used to name his pitchers like, is that all there is? After Peggy Lee in the song, That's All There Is. But they're there singing You Gotta Have Heart. Sullivan, you might not know, was a sports writer with the New York Daily News in the 1920s. He was also the ring announcer for the Daily News-sponsored Golden Gloves. And what you saw every week, if you remember the Sullivan Show, was a ring announcer. That's how he conducted himself. What you don't know is Jerry Stiller was my cousin, and they were on the show Stiller and Mirror probably 40 times. He told me a lot about Ed Sullivan, which I talk about in my TV talk. But this is a good time to segue to another TV show that did involve Jerry Stiller. It was the Seinfeld show. And as Seinfeld fans know, George Steinbrenner was a character on the show. It was played by another actor, and Larry David did the voice of George Steinbrenner. Now, about 1994, 95, I was at a baseball function, and Rick Cerrone was there, and David Zen was there, and Joe Safety was there. And basically, these are old Yankee public relation directors. And George fired them once a year, Harvey Green too. But they were telling the story about the inside information that the Seinfeld show was getting from somebody about how realistic some of the stories involving George Steinbrenner were on the Seinfeld show. It was so realistic. I said, well, who gave it to them? And they said, well, it was George Steinbrenner who came up with some of the ideas that Larry David would use as part of the scripts for the Seinfeld show. The suggested storylines by George Steinbrenner: Missing George, Board Meeting Moved, Different Uniforms. Jerry Stiller played the part of Frank Costanza. And the Missing George show was pretty simple. George Steinbrenner goes to Frank Costanza's home and says, "We believe George Costanza is dead." And then Jerry Stiller, playing Frank Costanza, looks up and he says, You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps? Mr. Costanza. Well, the Yankees did trade Jay Buhner, who had a pretty good career with the Seattle Mariners, for Ken Phelps, who washed out with the Yankees. That story was based on a guy who worked at American Shipbuilding in Tampa that George owned. And George always was a little worried about him because he thought he hung out with the wrong crowd. He didn't tell anybody this, but he was taking a couple days off. So it's Friday. He leaves his car in the parking lot and leaves with a friend. And Monday morning, George comes into the parking lot and he sees the car. He goes in. He doesn't see the guy. And he gets worried about what happened to the guy, to the point where he calls the Tampa police, and they put out an all-points bulletin for this guy, similar to what happened in this show. Eventually, the guy came back to work, all similar to what happened in that show. Board meeting being moved. Big Stein smells something. Big Stein smells a calzone. They moved a meeting at Yankee Stadium, complete with everybody there, to a nearby restaurant at Yankee Stadium because George wanted some food. If you knew anything about George, your food was George's food. If you were around George and you had some food, he would pick it up like that. Different uniforms. That was done. The uniform shrank, but that was done part of the Tampa Yankees of the Florida State League. George also was on another NBC show, Saturday Night Live, where they parodied George Steinbrenner catching, George Steinbrenner first base, George Steinbrenner second base, and so on and so forth. Also, Saturday Night Live had Chico Escuela on, the Saturday Night Live character. Baseball, very, very good to me. So baseball was still involved in plots in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, but not as much. And George actually did audition for the Seinfeld show, and there he is with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who played Elaine, but it didn't work. If you could go up to YouTube and watch the video, it just doesn't work. It's not very good. Seinfeld was quoted as saying he actually did the scene in the show, and it was terrible. We couldn't use it. We cut him out. It wasn't funny. George was funny naturally, but he wasn't funny when he did things like going on TV for Seinfeld. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation. Jerry Seinfeld invited Keith Hernandez, wanted Keith Hernandez, the New York Mets star, 1986 World Series, on his show. Keith Hernandez never heard of Jerry Seinfeld. Hernandez said when his agent Scott Boras asked him if he wanted to be on Seinfeld, he replied, "What's that?" Boras said to him, the super agent, who's still around to this day in 2020, and this is going back well over 25, 30 years, Boras explained that the Seinfeld production company would fly him out first class, have him in a nice hotel for a week, pay him $15,000. Keith was ready to play himself on the show, and with that, they became good buddies. That particular slide was when Jerry and Keith met in a health club that Jerry and George Costanza used to go to all the time, and George got jealous because Keith spent too much time with Jerry. Wally Pip. Nobody is Wally Pipped anymore. It was a big saying for a long, long time. Wally Pip was the first baseman with the New York Yankees in 1925. So we're going back 95 years. And the legend had it that Wally Pip was replaced by Lou Gehrig. Wally Pip called in sick. He had a headache. It wasn't exactly true, but the myth lived on. Wally Pip. When you were Wally Pipped, that means don't call in sick because someone else could do your job and they may do it better. Gehrig was tearing up the minor leagues in Hartford. The Yankees wanted him up, and he replaced Wally Pip, and he didn't miss a game until 1939. Wally Pip ended up playing with the Detroit Tigers and made more money playing with the minor league New York Bears than he did with the New York Yankees. Cigarettes in baseball were a big, big, big deal. Bull Durham, the movie. Bull Durham was a cigarette back then. Old Gold cigarettes. If you can see Babe Ruth there, down there, Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. Looks like he's about ready to be electrocuted at Old Sparky in Sing Sing's. Got the blindfold on, and these two guys there, and smoother, better tasting, whatever that was. Not a cough in the carload. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth died of throat cancer. Chesterfield, ABC, always buy Chesterfield. The baseball man's cigarette. Bucky Harris and Bob Elliott and Ted Williams and Stan Musial and Joe DiMaggio and Ewell Blackwell. Always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. When you change to Chesterfield, the first thing you'll notice is their mildness. Chesterfield was the New York Giants sponsor. In 1951, the Giants and Dodgers played in the National League playoff. And some guy in Brooklyn decided that he wanted to hear Russ Hodges get very upset after the Dodgers beat the Giants in Game 3 of the 1951 playoffs and would go to the World Series. Of course, Bobby Thompson had different thoughts and hit the home run, and Russ Hodges, the famous call, the Giants win the pennant, Giants win the pennant, etc. He taped the broadcast, and then he called the Giants and said, hey, I'm going to be a good sport about it. You can have it. Russ Hodges paid $10 for the tape and sent him a carton of Chesterfields, and that's why we have the tape today. Yoo-hoo, Yogi Berra, the drink of champions. Yogi, Mickey. I can't see Mickey drinking Yoo-hoo, but he did. Moose Gowan, one of my favorite people ever to interview. Elston Howard. Joe Garagiola, who I got to know, knew Yogi Berra from 1925 on. 1927. They were both born in 1925. They lived on the same street. They knew each other since they were 2. And Joe was the translator on various shows like the Jack Paar Show. When Yogi would say something, Joe would say, this is what he really meant. Yogiisms. And Joe also told me that when Yogi stepped in it, he really stepped in it. Here's an example. First Yogi story. Yogi meets the Oliveri family. The Oliveri family came up with Yoo-hoo, and he meets them at a New Jersey country club. And the brand can't get out. It can't get onto the food shelves. Terrible time of getting it distributed. Well, Yogi tastes the drink, and the Oliveris, with bated breath, were waiting to hear his opinion. He liked it. Yogi is on board. And here's a Yogi story from Yoo-hoo. One time I was in the office and the phone rang when no one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. Yoo-hoo tasted like chocolate water, but people liked it. And when the company was sold for big bucks, Yogi made a lot of money off of it. Yogi sold Italian dressing, craft Italian dressing. For me, it's got everything. Sure makes swell salads. You gotta remember, Yogi was in the World Series virtually every year. He really didn't look like a baseball player. He was very popular. Yogi, I remember batteries that took water back in the day. Some of you might as well. Needs water only 3 times a year. I used to put water in the battery. Prestolite. I add water only 3 times a year. And you know what? You need that Christmas gift? Yogi has it for you. Well, before we get to that, he was part of the Miller Lite team selling beer. But that Christmas gift. This Christmas, ask Mom and Dad for Shelby, the winner's bike. And there he is, selling Shelby, the Shelby bike. Yogi Berra. Joe DiMaggio. Phil Rizzuto was so happy when he retired. He no longer had to pay for his meals. Here he is with Marilyn Monroe, Stork Club. Joe didn't pay for anything. So that cigarette he didn't pay for, the drink he didn't pay for, and the meal he probably didn't pay for. On January 14th, Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe eloped in San Francisco, and it became a huge story, so much so that everybody talked about it. In the early part of the 21st century, my friend, the late Morris Schneider from the Associated Press, teamed with Morris Engelberg, and you might have this book at the library, Morris and Me, about Joe DiMaggio, or Me and Joe, or whatever it was called. It was a 330-page book, 11 pages about Joe and Marilyn. Marv made a 5-year career out of those 11 pages, talking about Joe and Marilyn. I said, they were 11 pages. He said, yeah, but people came out, especially women. They want to know all about it. Joe D. and Marilyn Monroe eloped in San Francisco, January 14th, 1954. 10 months later, Marilyn Monroe files for divorce, citing only mental cruelty, but there may have been more to it than that. And this is what caused it. Marilyn Monroe, 26-foot Marilyn Monroe, in the middle of Stamford, Connecticut, with her derriere facing the First Congregational Church. That was the first thing that people walking out of the church saw. And on her left, your right, was another church. It was from the 7-Year Itch. And Joe didn't like the 7-Year Itch. He went there the day that she shot the subway scene. And apparently that they went home that night, and Joe didn't particularly like it. And afterwards, Marilyn filed for divorce. Joe was a simple guy. He wanted a wife who would cook for him. He wanted a wife that would be there for him. He wanted a wife that wasn't more famous than him. He wanted a wife that didn't make more money than him. He failed on all 4 accounts with Marilyn. Some of the songs that Joe was not involved with, also Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt from The Graduate. We Didn't Start the Fire from Billy Joel. Joe DiMaggio. Did you see Jackie Hit the Ball? That was Duke Ellington, about Jackie Robinson. And Teresa Brewer, Mickey, about Mickey Mantle. But let's talk about Mrs. Robinson and Simon and Garfunkel with the back old friends and bookends. Mike Nichols was doing The Graduate, and he needed some incidental music. And he started listening to Simon and Garfunkel, and Paul Simon came up with the do-do-do-do-do-do-do part of the song, which was used as incidental music. But CBS, that was the label, said, you know what, that song is pretty catchy. Maybe we could expand it a little bit. And they told Paul Simon, expand it, and he does. And he brings it to Mike Nichols. It's originally called Mrs. Roosevelt after Eleanor Roosevelt. And Mike Nichols, who was the guy who did The Graduate, said that from now on, it's Mrs. Robinson, because it came out of the movie The Graduate. And then there's the meeting between Joe DiMaggio and Paul Simon. And Johnny Blanchard, who was a catcher with the New York Yankees, third-string catcher, was kind of the guy who literally told it like it was. He told it like it was with Roger Maris and others. Maris, he said, was a hell of a nice guy, shy guy who couldn't take New York when he hit the 61 home runs. Said sports writers turned on him because he wasn't, quote, a real Yankee. But anyway, Blanchard told the story about how Joe and Paul meet for dinner. And they're introduced, and Joe says to Paul, what do you mean? Where have I gone? I did this Mr. Coffee thing. I did the Bowery Savings Bank. I'm here. I'm around. I haven't gone anywhere. And Paul Simon explains the song, Mrs. Robinson. And he says, and this is what Blanchard said, I was looking for an American hero. You're a hero. I was looking at Eleanor Roosevelt. I was looking at Ted Williams. But you were my baseball hero, and you left me when I was 10 years old. That was it. You left me when you were 10. I didn't see you anymore. So I asked, where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? You were a hero. You weren't around anymore. Officially, Paul Simon was on the Dick Cavett Show and told the story. I said I didn't mean the lines literally, that I thought of him as an American hero, and genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation, thanked me, we shook hands and said goodnight. But Mickey Mantle plays a role here because Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio hated each other. Joe DiMaggio looked to his left in 1951. He sees this beautiful looking man, blonde, built. Mantle comes out of the earth, and he's 37 with a bad heel on his way out. Mickey and Joe are in the outfield, World Series in 1951, and there's a fly ball hit to right center field. And Mickey is, who has great speed at that point in his life, is running, and he trips over a drain and tears up his knee. And he blamed DiMaggio for that because he thought Joe DiMaggio loafed on the ball. The two of them hated one another, absolutely hated one another. And Mickey says to Paul Simon, how come he's in the song, not me? And he says, Joe DiMaggio just sounds better than Mickey Mantle in that song. Paul Simon's on the Cavett Show, Dick's Cavett Show, and he says, why wasn't Mantle's name used? Apparently, Cavett's staff heard about this. Why wasn't Mantle's name used? And Paul Simon responded, it's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Terry Cashman, we share the same periodontist, wrote a lot of songs about baseball in the 1980s. I got to know Terry in the 1980s, 1990s. One of them, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, talking baseball. And if you notice that picture, it looks like there's a tooth missing. There is something missing. Duke Snyder, Joe DiMaggio, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle. Joe is airbrushed out of this picture at Shea Stadium. The reason why, he's not in the song. And he's airbrushed out of the record sleeve. Terry Cashman did a lot of baseball songs in the 1980s. Terry Cashman right now, you might be interested in, is working on a Jim Croce anthology. He produced all of Jim Croce's hits back in the early 1970s. Phil Rizzuto has a gold record and is in baseball's Hall of Fame because of Paradise by the Dashboard Light by Meatloaf. And I got to know Meatloaf a little bit here in Westchester. He coached his daughter's softball team and he used to hang out at Yankee Stadium. And we were talking about Scooter. And he said he was the perfect guy for that song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, the album Bat Out of Hell. Jim Simon wrote the music and the lyrics, and Meatloaf sung it. And they wanted Phil, and they invited Phil to do a Phil in the song, Paradise by the Dashboard Light, which is about a teenage guy who has the hots for a teenage girl, and he decides he wants to go all the way with the teenage girl, but she has some second thoughts about it. Will you love me forever? Will you love me forever? Da, 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 da. And they want Scooter right in the middle of that. So Phil Rizzuto provides some play-by-play broadcasts of a player who is an aggressive base runner, gets called out almost a couple times, and then finally he tries for home on the suicide squeeze. Now, Meatloaf said that it took about 100 takes until they got Phil Rizzuto to do the Phil Rizzuto part. He probably thought he was Olivier and did it non-Phil Rizzuto part. He said, just be Phil Rizzuto. Eventually he did. Eventually he's on the record. Now, Scooter's kids were going to school in Boston, in college in the late 1970s when the song Bat Out of Hell came out. And the kids told him, hey, Dad, that song's about sex. Holy cow, that Huckleberry, he didn't tell me about that. This is from the same guy who's doing a broadcast with Bill White back in the 1970s, and White's talking about a pitcher, and he says, Phil, he's got good rhythm today. And Phil says, you know, Cora and I use the rhythm method. Scooter. Topps baseball cards. Topps baseball cards. Now, with Topps baseball cards, well, before I get into that, Topps baseball cards, 1964. Miss Charles is my teacher, and she steals all my baseball cards, steals all the other baseball cards of all the other kids, the boys in the class. Now, I'm telling this to a crowd of people in Roseland at the Roseland Library. And I'm really upset, really, really upset, thinking about how my baseball cards were stolen. And I'm talking about Mrs. Charles, and there's a woman in the corner slinking down into her seat. And I look at her, and she's all red. I say, you, Mrs. Charles. I had to take it. You what? I had to take it. You took my baseball cards. I was 7 years old. You took my baseball cards. 5 cents. 5 cards, 5 cents. Stick of gum. My periodontist thanks Cy Berger for inventing the baseball card with gum. And he probably was thanking a lot of others who, periodontists, oral surgeons, who bit into bazooka bubble gum, which was like biting into a table or a floor. Anyway, I said, you took my baseball card. Why? Well, I was dating a guy, and he had a 6-year-old boy, and I liked the guy, and I wanted to make an impression on the boy, so I figured if I give him baseball cards, he'd like me. I said, you gave him my baseball cards. He couldn't buy it. I said, but I had to. And I'm looking at her. So what happened with this guy? We broke up. You broke up? You took my baseball cards, you couldn't impress the kids, and you broke up? Don't eat with her tonight. She's a bad woman. With the baseball card, you can also learn how to add, subtract, multiply the back of the baseball card with all the statistics, if you were so inclined. Gamble. I bet you didn't realize that gambling was your entree. Baseball cards, your entree to gambling, because you flip the cards or throw them against the wall, flip them like that, or you throw them down like that, heads and tails. Entree into gambling. Geography, if you cared to, you can find out where the city was on a map. And they were great bicycle flaps. You put the clothespin in and they made that whirling sound. Great, 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 great noise. Well, baseball, no new songs, no new literature, hardly any new movies. It's just another sport now. Homer Simpson is in baseball's Hall of Fame. An exhibit in 2017, Homer Simpson, who played against the major leaguers. He's there along with Casey at the bat, John Fogerty's song Center Field, done in 1985, the movie League of Their Own, and of course Abbott and Costello, who's on first. Baseball by 1965 was number 2 to football. It's me interviewing Joe Namath of the New York Jets in 1988. The 20th anniversary of the Jets winning the Super Bowl. In 1965, football surpassed baseball as the #1 followed sport in America. 1950, it was baseball, horse racing, boxing that dominated American sports. In horse racing, only a Triple Crown winner. And there were movies about Triple Crown winning horses. Boxing dominated the American sports scene as well and was very popular in the early days of TV. But by 1965, that was over. And there's Muhammad Ali, who did a lot for boxing in the 60s and 70s into the 80s. This is 1985, me and him. And by that point, you couldn't really speak to him. The Parkinson's kicked in, and also getting hit in the head 60,000 times didn't help. Horse racing, they're downsizing all these tracks. This is Gulfstream in Florida and Hollandale, Florida. And racetracks survive because of casinos right now. That is Jim Bouton and me in 2007. Jim Bouton wrote Ball 4, and he once said, you know, you grip the baseball, and you have this grip around the baseball, and you think you're gripping it, but the truth is, baseball is gripping you. Jim Bouton wrote baseball's most famous book, Ball 4, which is probably in the library, that humanized players. One of the 20 most influential books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library, and maybe the Shelter Rock Public Library as well. It was a book humanized Mickey Mantle and other players. It was also used as part of the arbitration by Peter Seitz, looking at evidence which ended the reserve clause. Even soccer has taken over baseball. In a lot of areas, you see more soccer fields used than baseball. I was in a movie called The Sons of Ben about these crazy soccer fans in Philadelphia that came out in 2015, and that was the red carpet down in Philadelphia. Now, it ain't over until it's over, right? It ain't over until it's over. Nobody goes to that restaurant anymore because it's too crowded. If you see a fork in the road, take it. It gets early out. It gets laid out there early. Carmen, his wife, Yogi's wife, said to him, Yogi, Tim went to see Dr. Zhivago. What's wrong with him now? It ain't over until it's over. There's not much of a story here that I'm going to give you, but I'm going to give you the Yogi story. Like I said, I spoke at Yogi's museum a lot. Yogi used to come to my talks and pat my back. Good job, kid. Good job, kid. Good job, kid. And I miss Yogi. The last time I saw him was in 2011. And I spoke there. And that was on June 26, 2011. last time I spoke there. Mike Dyer was a sports writer for the Long Island Press. This is 1973. Mike Dyer now lives in Sarasota, Florida, Bradenton, Florida area. And he's working for the Long Island Press. New York Mets players are injured that year, 1973. A lot of players. Seaver's injured, Grody's injured, a whole bunch of players. That's the year that M. Donald Grant, who was the owner of the Mets, or ran the Mets for the owner, Joe Payson, went down to the clubhouse and gave a speech, and Tug McGraw yelled, "You gotta believe, you gotta believe, you gotta believe." Mike Dyer, it's September. The games are dwindling down to a precious few. The Mets hang in there, and they hang in there and hang in there, and they're within striking distance to win the National League East pennant. But the Mets lose. Time is slipping away. And Mike Dyer asked Yogi Berra. He said, "Yogi, is it too late?" And Yogi says, "It ain't over till it's over." Well, it ain't over till it's over. That is me. That is Yogi. That is Brian Cashman, the Yankee general manager. June 26th, 2011, the last time Yogi came to one of my talks. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ellen, for inviting me. I hope you enjoyed the talk. If anybody has any questions or any comments or wants to add anything to it, feel free. I will unmute you if you want to say anything. If you have anything to add, go ahead. Mr. Tort or M. Tort. Mr. Tort, is that?
Yeah, that's not my real name. It's
okay.
David.
Okay, your mic is on, so.
I needed a screen name. But, that was great. I loved your talk.
Thank you. I've left a lot out too.
I'm sure you did.
Yeah.
What do you think, since it's #2 now, what do you think the future for baseball is?
Hey, you know what? You're making billions of dollars a year from TV and revenue. You could be #2 and #3. It doesn't really matter. You're making a lot of money. You know, the problem with baseball is that young kids aren't following it, and minorities aren't following it. And they got to, you know, I mentioned the Negro League. You know, Willie Mays came out of the Negro League. Hank Aaron was there, Monty Irvin, Satchel Paige and all. African-American interest has dropped. It's big in football and big in basketball. But you know what? You can make more money and be safer in baseball than in football. I mean, sometimes I don't understand that. But, you know, you could be very comfortable not being the national pastime and making a lot of money. And they do make a lot of money. Baseball, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, was stuffed with money. Absolutely stuffed with money. Of course, what goes on after when the pandemic does end, that's going to be it's going to be very interesting to see. Will people flock back to the ballpark or to, you know, football stadiums or indoor arenas? That's a question that nobody seems to know right now. But if baseball was in such trouble, which it's not, why are there groups in Portland, Oregon, in Nashville, and in Montreal that want to get into the game, want to become a major league city? So you look at it and, okay, they're not #1 anymore, but it's not like boxing and it's not like horse racing. They bring in billions of dollars a year. And the most valuable team in baseball is, of course, the New York Yankees, which is like the 3rd most valuable team in the whole world. And every baseball team is worth over $1 billion. That's what the business is worth. So I don't think, even though they're, you know, kids don't go out like I did when I was 8 years old and play baseball every day, with our Spaldings as well, stoop ball. I don't think they have a problem. It just might not be #1 anymore. But their ratings are still better than the NBA. I mean, the NFL, there's a lot to be said about the NFL. Yeah, it's played 16 times a year, and people tailgate and all that other stuff on it.
The spy was some of his family. And then later, of course, we're going to meet Tennessee.
Anybody else Well,
You
Ellen, I want to thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was good to see you.
Good, yeah,
And
it's
hear
good
you.
to see you visually, and we got one more next month. I don't even
Right.
know what it's about, but I know it's next month. And this obviously will be able to. I recorded it, so I'll send it to you, and you can put it out on your social platforms.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that, Evan.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, be
so,
well.
yeah, and thank you everybody else, and we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Be well.
Okay,
Take care.
thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Mr. Tort, and everybody for showing up today. And enjoy the Labor Day weekend, which is coming up sooner than later. Summer is almost over. Okay, have a good night, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Be well. Thanks again.
Okay, bye-bye.